Hello, welcome to Ray-ality TV. I'm Raymond Bakari, and today I'm joined by former Chief of Staff for then Governor Raimondo, former Rhode Island Director of Administrations, and now 2022 Providence Mayoral Candidate, Brett Smiley. Mr. Smiley, how are you today?
I'm great. Nice to be here.
No problem, and it's a pleasure of mine to have you on the show. Mr. Smiley, you are running to be the next mayor of Providence, Rhode Island. What made you want to run to be the next mayor?
You know, Providence has got all of the ingredients to be a world-class city. We've got incredible diversity. We've got amazing world-class restaurants, this quality of life here, the historic architecture, world-class universities, a deep sea port. I mean, assets that other cities would love to have that you couldn't recreate if you tried to. And yet it always feels like we're just out of reach at being able to actualize that potential to reach that status as a world-class city. And I believe what is holding us back is our inability to ever just get right the basic quality of life and core neighborhood issues that residents really want and what they pay taxes for. And so I'm running this year to refocus on the basics, if you will, on the core quality of life issues, the neighborhood issues. And I think that my experience in both city government and state government bring me to the table with a very different set of skills and qualifications where I think I can effectively get the job done and get it done better than the other people thinking about running.
And I should add, this is you're actually your second time running for mayor of Providence. You had previously ran in the 2014 mayoral election and ended up placing fourth in the Democratic primary. What key differences do you see with this campaign compared to your 2014 bid for mayor?
Sure. So, I mean, I withdrew from that race. There were a couple people who didn't get the memo come election day, but that was a very unique time. We had the reemergence of Buddy Cianci, who was a twice convicted former mayor of Providence that I was afraid would result in a very big step backwards for our city. Providence had had a reputation for corruption, for political cronyism, and we've done a lot to change that reputation as a city. And so it made me very nervous that Cianci had reemerged and that he might win. Mayor Elorza and I at the time, candidate Elorza at that time, we had more in common than we had apart. And so I decided to withdraw from the race and throw my support behind him for the betterment of the city. And I'm glad I did so and went on to serve in the early days of his administration. This year is an entirely different circumstance. There's no significant threat from someone like Buddy Cianci, and the challenges that are facing the city now are not about stepping backwards or not, but about how we move forward and how we resolve some of the underlying financial problems. How do we make progress on the education system, and the people that I'm running against. I think we all care deeply about Providence, and we're all running for the right reasons. It's just going to be a question about whose vision can connect with the residents of the city, and who do the city residents trust can actually deliver on their campaign promises.
And taking a shifting to the issues for a moment, as at the time of this interview where we're filming it, there is a campaign website for your campaign, but there's no issues section. What are some of the key issues you plan to focus on in this campaign? Because I know you touched upon going back to the basics.
Sure. So, as you rightly point out, it's the beginning of the campaign here. So, of course, the website will get built out with more policy positions as the year progresses. But I think it is critical that we address these core city services, things like the quality of our infrastructures, roads, sewers, potholes, the things that frustrate families on a day-to-day basis, graffiti, the ATV and motorbike issue, all of these things that just make it harder to live in Providence. Additionally, I intend to focus on the changes underway in our public school system, getting right, the public education system for families in Providence is critical. That's the future of our city and probably the top concern of most families, if not all families with kids. And then finally, too many of the promises that'll be made or the things that the city might want to do are fantasy if we don't right the ship financially. And so that means both addressing the financial problems that the city's undertaken, but also thinking about job growth and economic development. When I served Governor Raimondo, she was relentlessly focused on economic development, and many of the economic development successes you see in Providence were as a result of either a partnership with the state or exclusively things that the state did. And we benefited from the fact that Governor Raimondo was so focused on economic development, and frankly, so focused on economic development in Providence. The city has not had a robust economic development plan in some time, and that is a priority of mine as well. We can't rely on the state for that. And in particular, the state will always probably have a disproportionate role in attracting major employers and big development. But the backbone of business in Providence is small neighborhood businesses. And I don't think the state's ever going to be the best resource for them. And that's the city's responsibility. And so that's a key priority for mine as well.
And you had mentioned infrastructure and fixing the roads. And I recall you had mentioned in an interview a while back on the Pulse of Providence that you want to get back to the basics and focus on infrastructure and fixing our roads and things along those lines. How would you fix the roads as the city's roads as mayor?
So, there's nothing that makes me crazier, and any resident in any neighborhood can name the street that bothers them the most. But the thing that makes me nuts is, as I referenced earlier, we've got financial problems in Providence. We're resource constrained. We don't have a lot of money to waste. And yet the few roads that we do pave, then they get cut open again. And so, I live on the east side. Right now, they're digging up North and South Main Street again. They just paved that last summer. And so they paved it last summer at great expense, huge disruption to the businesses on those streets. And then this summer, National Grid decides that they're going to do gas main work. And so they're digging them up again. Now, I've been paying attention because that happens to be I traverse that street to get anywhere. And they've dug it up twice this summer already. It's not even summer yet. And so what's going to be left is this temporary patch, which will degrade and potholes will exist. And then eventually it will get repaved. Because I'm kind of fanatical about this stuff, I've already been calling people, and I've been promised that National Grid will repave the street curb to curb, which is great, except for one, it's a waste of money because we just paved it. And two, when they repave the street, that means we're going to dig it up again and disrupt those businesses again. The same thing is true. Finally, we paved Smith Street a couple years ago. There's now utility cuts on Smith Street, and 1 or 2 more winters, those will be massive potholes. And there's a story like this everywhere across the city. And so I intend to hold the utility companies accountable. I intend to be relentlessly focused on the details of making sure that when we do decide to pave a street, because we do have a capital improvement plan, it's just we waste that money, that every utility, we say, Chalkstone Avenue is getting opened up this summer. Everybody has to do their work now. And if you don't do your work now, you can't cut into that street for 7 years. And we've tried this in the past. We just lose track of it. We don't hold people accountable. We don't hold ourselves accountable. We can do better. And taxpayers' money is being wasted over and over again.
And kind of still focusing on the infrastructure topic before I move on to the next issue. While still on the infrastructure topic, Providence has a lot of potential with development. We're seeing that with things like the Fane Tower. However, there are problems that exist in that with problems like Brown University and Providence College taking up so much land. So this is kind of a multi-part question. As mayor, how would you attract business to help develop the city for economic success with proposals like the Fane Tower? And does any of it involve holding Providence College and Brown University accountable to make them pay their fair share?
Great. Yeah. So there are kind of 2 parts to this equation. On the development side, we have to make Providence an attractive place to do business. There's kind of an old cliche, which is, we don't want people paying more taxes. We want more people paying taxes. And so, I believe that we need to grow the tax base. We need to expand the tax base. We need to develop Providence. We have a housing crisis, so we need to develop affordable rental units. We have a residential housing crisis right now, so we need to allow for the development of single family homes. And we need to continue to develop opportunities like the 195 district, where there are vacant parcels that we're trying to market for the purposes of job creation. And so making it easier to do business in Providence means predictable and reliable zoning. Things get held up in zoning way too long. It means competitive tax structure. The city over the last 10 years, really, since the Taveras administration, has not raised the commercial property tax rate, which is great because it was at the time, and frankly still is, a bit of an outlier regionally. And now there's a debate going on in the city council about tax stabilization agreements, or TSAs, which is a mechanism where you offer discounted taxes for a period of time that kind of phases up to allow for new development to have an incentive to get started, and they don't have to pay 100% of their taxes until a couple of years in. Those are all good things to do. And I do support the continued growth and expansion of the city, and particularly the development of additional housing, because this housing crisis is real. It is statewide, but it's particularly acute in Providence. On the nonprofit question, we have an opportunity to do more with the colleges and universities and hospitals, the nonprofits. They have what are called pilot agreements, payment in lieu of taxes. A series of those actually expire and come up for renegotiation during the next term. So the next mayor, whoever it is going to have an opportunity to reshape those. We've made progress since the Cicilline administration, and then another layer of progress in the Taveras administration. We need to continue to do more and better there. It's roughly 45% of the tax base in Providence is tax exempt. All municipalities in Rhode Island, and Providence in particular, is primarily funded by property taxes, and almost half of our property taxes are tax exempt. And so you've got 60% of the city paying 100% of the bills. And that's why we have a property tax problem. And so we can do better. We will renegotiate those. I look back now again as an opportunity, which is I have working relationships with the leaders of most of those institutions. I've been in negotiations of that caliber before, and I'm confident I can do a good job on behalf of the city. The other group that's not currently paying that needs to come to the table are the hospitals. The hospitals are also tax exempt institutions. Rhode Island Hospital and Care New England, or Lifespan, which is the parent company of Rhode Island Housing and Hospital, and Care New England are contemplating a merger. And so that'll be a bit of a game changer in terms of how does the city negotiate with and relate to the new combined entity. And as mayor, I intend to ensure that the hospitals contribute to the fiscal health of the city as well, because they consume services, they impact the neighborhood. And many, many years ago, their kind of primary answer for why they don't pay taxes is because they provide uncompensated care, because they provide medical services to the uninsured. Rhode Island, and we should be very proud of this, has one of the highest insurance rates in the country. Nearly everybody has insurance. And when they passed the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, there are subsidies that come directly from the federal government for the small percentage of people who don't have insurance. And so I find that argument that they provide uncompensated care as their contribution to be less true today than it used to be. And we know that they consume services, and frankly, they have a vested interest. They're a part of the community. They're an important employer. I don't want to be punitive, but at the same note, we need to see that their interests align with our interests, which is that they want their employees, their patients, to walk into an attractive neighborhood that's safe, that's clean, that has decent streets and good infrastructure. All of those things that every other resident wants, they want as well. And so we need to bring them to the table and have a fruitful negotiation on how to contribute to the city's financial stability.
Kind of to unpack that, so you're planning on using your past negotiation experiences to make when renegotiating that, to make Brown and PC pay their fair share. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes, but again, that's absolutely true, and fair share is a little bit of a term of art. So I do think that we should and can think broader. In the past, these negotiations have turned rather sour with past mayors. And I would like to think broader than just money. When I talk about contributing to the financial health of the city, I think that can take more forms than just a payment, a cash payment, and would love to get into a thoughtful and reasonable negotiation with them where we can think about other things like job creation, business spin-offs, shared services, other ways in which there's multiple ways to help the city's financial stability and fiscal health. It doesn't just have to be a check. And I'm hopeful that that pivot might provide a productive avenue for negotiations that in the past have turned, acrimonious.
And just one last quick follow-up before we move to the next topic. The Fane Tower, are you in favor of or opposed to it?
So, I mean, the cake is pretty baked at this point. The thing that I'm anxious about is I don't think that project, I don't think the math worked at the beginning. The assumptions that the developer made in terms of what they would need to sell or rent units for, to me, seem wildly optimistic. They're talking about rental rates and sales prices that are equivalent to what you get in New York City. This is in New York City. And so I think the worst thing that could happen, the absolute worst case scenario, is that the city get left with a half-built tower. That's truly a nightmare. That they start to build, project goes bust, and the city or the state or who knows who is on the hook to figure out what to do with the thing. And so it's permitted, it's approved. The 195 Commission is trying to hold the developer accountable to meeting the obligations to what it's agreed to. And what I see is most important now in terms of my role as the candidate and prospective mayor is to ensure that the commission hold that guy accountable, that he does what he says he's going to do, and that they don't start building until he's confident that he can actually do this, because I'm skeptical that the financial terms actually pencil out.
So kind of like cautiously optimistic in the wait and see approach to see if it actually holds out to be what's promised?
More like hold accountable to make sure that the state and city isn't being sold a bill of goods.
And moving on to the next topic, one of the big issues in cities around the country this past summer, and sort of coming back a little bit, was defunding the police. There are a lot of debates about this issue, and some cities have even started to take funds away from their city police departments. I believe New York City was one of them, taking away $1 billion. Where do you stand on the issue of defunding the police in Providence?
So I think this conversation around rethinking who or what is the appropriate response to a distress call is really good and healthy. Not every person who calls 911 or not every person who needs help probably needs to be served by an armed law enforcement officer. And so the city has, through the city council, and I think the mayor's team, started to explore these crisis response teams that have been tested in other cities, whereby mental health professionals, social service professionals, addiction professionals are sent on responses instead of or in addition to local police officers. I think that is absolutely the right thing to do and the right direction to go to. I know that the term defund the police has kind of sowed confusion and maybe division amongst a bunch of people. I don't personally support the reduction in the police force, but I do support the augmentation to our police resources to send the appropriate response to the appropriate crisis call, and to free up police resources to respond where a police response is necessary. And then for many people, and particularly in Providence and really across America, but we continue to suffer from an addiction crisis and a mental health crisis. In many instances, the best person to serve that person in crisis is a public health worker or a social service worker.
And that is a common argument when you hear for the response to defunding the police. However, when you mentioned the whole social worker thing and getting social workers depending on the situation, wouldn't that still technically be taking money away from that would be used originally for the police and then just bringing it to another area? Wouldn't that still kind of take away the money from the police?
I mean, you're right in that all of these things come down to a resource allocation. Like I said, I would personally not cut the police budget. I would, and fiscal responsibility and economic growth and tax policy and all these other things that I'm passionate about, all have to do with growing the size of the pie, if you will, for Providence's budget to allow for these additional resources to meet the needs of Providence residents or people in Providence, and it would be residents in crisis.
And just kind of like a final follow up, because regardless of whatever someone's political affiliation is, people want to feel safe. A lot of Providence residents want to feel safe and protected. The city has seen spikes in crime over recent years. So, if Mayor, can you assure the people of Providence that the police department won't lose any funding with all the power that you can use to make that a reality and ensure that the neighborhoods will be safe?
Yeah, I mean, I can't get into the kind of nuanced of the budget at this point, but I have said, I just said a minute ago, that I don't intend to reduce the police department's budget. I do intend to look broadly at public safety and actually try to add resources to meet the needs of the city in the various strategies and ways in which it's most important. I mean, to be honest, I mean, one of the most important public safety things we can do is invest in healthy, productive things for young people to do. I mean, that's an alternative to policing. That doesn't mean cut the police budget, but that means continue to fund things like summer jobs programs, paid internships, recreation centers and recreation leagues. I mean, a lot of I mean, think about the ATV issues as an example. I think that is a major nuisance issue for the city, and I think it's a safety issue for both the riders and other motorists and pedestrians. But I'm also sympathetic to the fact that it is it's an outlet for activity for primarily young people, and that doesn't mean that I have a tolerance for illegal vehicle operation. But I also recognize the other side of the coin is we have to provide healthy, constructive things for young people to do, and so in some sense, I would consider that a public safety investment.
And kind of shifting the focus a bit to some of the things the current mayor, Mayor Elorza, has done. One of the noteworthy things the current mayor has done. This kind of plays into a little bit to what you said on expanding the pie and getting new sources of revenue to add resources. Mayor Elorza had signed an executive order that makes the first steps towards reparations in the city of Providence. Multiple things are being considered, like removing names of people who were involved in slavery and other injustices off of buildings. And an idea that has been adopted in Evanston, Illinois, where they use tax revenue from legalized marijuana and fund housing as a form of reparations. If elected mayor, do you plan to move forward with those plans of reparations that Mayor Elorza has started to put in place?
So I think the first phase, the truth-telling phase of the process, has been excellent. And I appreciate and respect not just the mayor, but in particular the African American Ambassadors Group, which has really been driving this process of community leaders and experts. Obviously, our country has a shameful history of slavery, but it's important to acknowledge that Rhode Island and Providence has a shameful history of slavery. This isn't just like a southern states problem. And so that's been important to look those past sins and injustices in the face. The next phase, the reparations phase, I think we need to be careful and we need to communicate clearly about what it does and doesn't mean, because it's one, I don't think the Black and African American and Indigenous community, the BIPOC community, needs to hear more empty promises from politicians. But the other side is, I think it means different things to different people. And I'm open to the idea that there might be policy changes and, back to the question of resource allocation, and an allocation of resources differently that could start to look like could mean reparations to some, which might mean equity or a targeted investment to others. And so I followed what's going on, and it's pronounced Evanston. It happens to be very close to where I grew up outside of Chicago. I followed that very closely, and the community is wrestling with that right now, and I think Providence will have to do the same.
And kind of focusing on the allocation of resources, like I had mentioned, there are also concerns where the money for this would come if, for example, marijuana doesn't end up being legalized, or like the revenue isn't as much as projected. There are other concerns as well that this might get to the point where tax revenue from residents would fund these plans instead of things like improving our failing school system, our damaged roads, whatever holes in revenue that are attempting to be filled with things like speed cameras, for example. Are those legitimate concerns that taxpayers and residents should have, since it could potentially be their tax dollars? And if elected mayor, what would you do to address those concerns?
Yeah, I mean, Mayor Elorza's already flagged that we need to, kind of be restrained in what we assume this reparation phase might be. And so there's a lot of work left to be done, and I look forward to working with the African American Ambassadors Group, who's led this process, and I think there's still more to go in this process.
Would you rule out raising any income taxes for residents if,
Well,
say, for example, the marijuana revenue isn't enough?
So we don't have a municipal income tax in Providence, and I don't support one. So I guess I would rule that because it's not an option.
I mean, property taxes, my bad.
Yeah, I mean, for this purpose, no. I mean, the property tax conversation needs to stay in the context of the whole city budget, and we need to, unfortunately, be sensitive to our competitiveness to our neighbors, so that Providence remains a kind of attractive place to live for people who have the choice if they wanted to move to Cranston or Warwick quite easily.
And the next issue I mentioned briefly in the last question is the city school system. The school system was failing and required a state takeover. There are a lot of sub-issues that are clouded over by this main issue. One of those is the expansion of charter schools. But before we talk about that issue, since the failing school system had been a lingering issue over years, for years, what would you do / think could have been done differently in terms of fixing Providence's school system as mayor?
What would I have done in the past?
Yeah, either what would you have done, or what could be done, either or.
Well, so we're in the middle of this takeover now. We've done this very disruptive thing, and we were supposed to be in year one of the turnaround plan the school year that's just wrapping up now. Of course, that was all COVID. The grand plans for the turnaround all got scrapped to think about things like distance learning and safe distancing and all those other things. So next year, the next school year, is really going to be the year one. I think we need to give the turnaround plan a chance to work. We need to continue to, as community members, advocate for the successful conclusion of the negotiations between the State Department of Education and the Providence Teachers Union. And we need to try to keep parents engaged. I think it was 2 summers ago when the Johns Hopkins report came out, and then there was a series of community meetings over the summer. That was a level of parental and family and community engagement in our schools that we hadn't seen in a long time, and that was one of the most positive early things to come out of this effort. I'm nervous that we're going to lose that level of engagement because time has passed. I don't think that's anyone's fault. It's mostly pandemic related, but we need to try to stay engaged as a community. I think we need to support the turnaround plan. We need to hope that the parties can reach a favorable and positive conclusion of the teachers union negotiations. And then my hope is that in the first term of the next mayor, I hope in my administration, we transition the schools back to local control. I don't think the schools should be under state control for the long run. I don't think that has a history of working. It hasn't worked particularly well in Central Falls. And so I'd like to see some changes get made, the turnaround plan implemented, and then the schools turned back to local control.
So for now, keep it to seat, and then after polishing it up, then bring it back to the local control?
Yes.
Okay. And since I had mentioned the expansion of charter schools, where do you personally stand on if there should be an expansion of charter schools or not in Providence?
So I don't think this question's quite as simple as that. I support the expansion of high quality charter school seats, and I support the reduction or the revocation of charters that are underperforming. The State Department of Education, the State Board of Education has a rigorous review process where they evaluate proposals for new charters, and they evaluate the renewal of existing charters. And so I think that there are charters in Providence and in the state, but we're talking about Providence here, who are providing a better education with better results than many of our traditional public schools. And I don't see how we deny families in Providence the opportunity to send those kids to those schools. The wait list has thousands of students on it. That to me is kind of the only data point that matters. It's clear that parents want this option, and they're getting good results for their kids. And so I do support the expansion of additional charter seats if they are deemed to be high quality charter seats. And then for the charter schools that aren't meeting the mark or are underperforming the traditional system, they should not be renewed.
Sort of like a case by case basis?
Yeah, and that process is already in place. This conversation gets charged and political pretty quickly. But the reality is there's already a process in place for the granting of new charter seats and for the revocation of charter seats. And I have confidence in that process. I have confidence in the people on the State Board of Education, and I have confidence in the process in which they go through. So I would like to try to keep more and more politicians out of this conversation and let those who've been entrusted with implementing this process and policy do their job, and then provide higher quality options for students and parents who want it.
And the argument does get heated, as you mentioned, especially with the charter school moratorium bill being proposed. A lot of parents, and there is a support for charter schools that is higher than it has been ever before, and a lot of parents want to send their children to a school that performs well and can give the best education to their children as possible. Proponents of the things like charter school expansions and school choice combat the argument that it would take resources away from the public schools by responding that the charter schools perform better. In some cases they do, and that the teachers unions demands are partly to blame, what they say are partly to blame for the failing public schools in Providence. Do you feel that that'd be a fair assumption to make, that the teachers unions and the increasing demands are to blame for this? And if not, then who would be to blame for this?
I mean, I don't want to blame anyone other than to say that we generally know what works. And in fact, most of those things aren't super complicated. Longer school days, longer school years, high quality teachers, and strong school leaders, principals. And so that's what yields a better education. There's a lot of other things, and there's a whole field of professionals who make a nice living in this world. But when you boil it down, it comes down to many of those core components: longer school day, longer school year, high quality teachers, strong school leaders. It seems that some of our charters, some of our high performing charters have been able to check those boxes, who have been able to accomplish those things, either through additional flexibility or because people want to work there. I mean, I think it's probably a combination of factors, but that's what we need to be striving for. And it's not about blaming anyone. The teachers union has a job to do, and I get that, and I look forward to having a productive working relationship with them. But we need to stop focusing on the adults and start the conversation by focusing on the children, and then work our way backwards to what do we need to do to support the adults to serve the youth.
And an interesting final point I want to bring up before we circle to the next topic: a lot of Democrats years ago were more in favor of charter schools than they are now. Just out of curiosity, why do you feel that the opinion has changed to a lot more of those on the left being against charter schools? And could it be attributed to the fear of losing the support of the influential teachers unions?
I think education is one of these things that is deeply personal for everyone. We all have our own story. I think about I went to good public schools in the suburbs. We all have our own experience. It's one of these things. It's not some abstract policy issue that maybe any individual has no experience with. We all have an experience with school, and parents want what's best for their kids, and they make as informed a decision as they can for what's best for their kids. So I think education in schools and the charter discussion, it kind of bends the traditional right, left, Democrat, Republican conversation, because in a sense, we all have our own well-formed opinion that's usually rooted in what our personal family or very personal actual lived experiences. And so, I don't know why certain politicians do certain things, but I know why parents and students ask for what they want. It's because we've all lived through it, and we all have a perspective on, none of us, there's professionals, but most of us aren't experts in this field, but we all kind of went through school, and we have a recollection of what that was like and what works. Whether you're a parent helping your kid do homework, or you're seeing the quality of the instruction, particularly this last year through distance learning, we all have a very personal connection to education. And I think it changes and distorts the conversation a little bit. And I think that's why you're starting to see more and more parents in support of other options, because they don't care if it's a Democrat or Republican issue or a left issue or right issue. They want what's best for their kids. That's it.
So personally, you would disagree with the notion that notion that's brought up by proponents of charter schools?
I don't think it's fruitful to get in the middle of it. I think if we continue to focus on how do we deliver the best education possible for young people, then you just kind of follow the breadcrumbs of that trail and support the policies that result in better education for the kids. I don't think it is helpful to ascribe political punditry to why one thing works or another thing doesn't. Let's see what's actually providing better education, and then do that. And forget about kind of where the traditional party lines fall.
Now, circling back to noteworthy things Mayor Elorza had done as mayor is making Providence a sanctuary city. A lot of critics show concerns, especially given how it has gone around the country in other sanctuary cities. For example, in San Francisco, California, a sanctuary city saw Kate Steinle get shot and killed by an undocumented immigrant who had been deported multiple times in the past and was being protected by that city's sanctuary city status. This is a two-part question. What's your stance on Providence being a sanctuary city? And if something like that were to occur here in Providence, what actions would you consider taking? And would any of it be possibly getting rid of the sanctuary city status?
Well, I don't know if you can define for me what a sanctuary city is, but it's I think it's a bit of a term of art, and it's certainly a term that gets thrown around on both sides. What I can say is that the immigrant community in Providence is part of its strength, that undocumented immigrants in Providence are an important part of the fabric of the city as well. They're hardworking and compassionate, family-loving people in our city that go to work every day and are here to make a better lives for them and their families. And I love them, and I'm glad they're here. And as mayor, I would do whatever I could to ensure that they weren't subject to harassment or federal intervention. That's not to say that if any person, documented or otherwise, commits a crime, that they shouldn't be held accountable. Of course they should. But the scare tactics that have happened in other places, and certainly some of the things that we heard and read about during the Trump administration, gave real reason for fear in the undocumented immigrant community. That I'm pleased that Providence has a reputation as a safe place for immigrant families, documented or undocumented. And as mayor, I intend to continue to provide that respect and trust and safety for those families. And then any Providence resident who's breaking the law or committing a crime should be held accountable.
And I'm kind of going to that the definition in this context. It was protections that were given to undocumented immigrants in San Francisco that had resulted in the undocumented immigrant who was deported multiple times still being allowed in the city, and then that resulted afterward him ending up shooting and killing Kate Steinle. You had mentioned if someone does commit crimes, actions should be taken. So what would those actions be if someone were to commit crimes and as we're a sanctuary city, if they were an undocumented immigrant?
Well, the status quo today in Rhode Island is if you're held on a crime or you're in the ACI, the state prison, the U.S. Department of ICE, the immigration control folks, they have access to that data anyway. They always have, and as far as I know, they will. So the federal agents already have the ability to process deportation for a detained or imprisoned Rhode Islander. And so I don't anticipate that changing. That's a state policy decision anyway. It's not a local policy decision. What I'm talking about, and I think probably what Mayor Elorza is talking about, is the proactive cooperation on deportation orders for residents who've done nothing wrong beyond being here without papers.
And kind of circling back to another thing that Mayor Elorza had done during his time as mayor, a lot of mayors around the country have joined Mayors for a Guaranteed Income, including Mayor Elorza. There are debates about how this would be paid for. I believe there was talks about philanthropists paying for. I believe the CEO of Twitter was one of them. With this, my bad. There are a lot of debates about how this would be paid for. Would it make people less inclined to work? Would this create a burden on the backs of taxpayers and et cetera if philanthropists can't foot the whole bill? Should Providence, in your personal opinion, should Providence commit to a guaranteed basic income program for residents, and why or why not?
So I think universal basic income or guaranteed basic income is a very interesting policy discussion. You know, Andrew Yang talked about it a lot on his presidential campaign. He's apparently the front runner for mayor of New York City. So who knows, maybe New York's going to try something if he were to be elected. And I think the notion that I mean, to be really simplistic about it, what poor people need is money. And and we've seen over the last year through the pandemic, whether it's the couple rounds of stimulus checks or several of the supplemental aid programs, whether it's the enhanced unemployment benefit or other, the Rhode Island's been giving supplemental cash assistance. We've seen very basic needs get met through these supplemental programs, which to me is compassionate and just. I'm intrigued by the conversation. I do think it should be a conversation held at a level higher than the city, though. My angst here is that, as we've mentioned a few times tonight, Providence is a poor city. And we have very serious financial constraints. And so you're right in that philanthropy is paying for the Providence pilot, which is good. I don't think that's been communicated very clearly, that Providence taxpayer dollars are not paying for this pilot, and I would not support Providence taxpayer dollars paying for this pilot. But I think it's an interesting conversation, and I hope we continue to have it as a country.
And it's you kind of, I'm thankful for this, because you did answer my follow-up. I was going to ask, as mayor, can you assure that Providence taxpayers wouldn't have a tax increase? And you had mentioned that you wouldn't be in favor of that. So shifting to the next topic, the landscape for the Providence 2022 mayoral election is still a bit unknown since we're still over a year out. However, that hasn't stopped potential candidates from fundraising money for a potential campaign. Like City Councilwoman Yerva LaFortune, she's fundraising right now. She's currently exploring the option. Gonzalo Cuervo, he announced he's running. I believe there hasn't been a formal campaign announcement similar to yours yet, but he has intentions of running. And there are other candidates too that could potentially end up running, like State Representative Ray Hull, State Representative Grace Diaz. I heard rumblings Kobe Dennis might give it another shot. Dylan Conley, who was on the show, had flirted with the idea, but it's still early, so we don't know the full landscape yet. And this is a question that you probably will hear a lot from residents as you're knocking on doors in months to come. Why would you be a better mayor for the city than your opponents?
Yeah, this election and the city really needs to ask itself. I think you're going to have a lot of candidates and politicians who make promises. And by the way, probably many of us are going to make similar promises. And the question is, who can deliver on those promises? Who can actually do what they say they're going to do? And so, and that's where I believe I have something different to offer and have a substantially different track record. I'm the only candidate of that list, that long list of current or prospective candidates, that has managed a budget of anything close to this size. I wrote the city's 10-year financial plan in the first year of the Elorza administration. I managed the city's budget, and then I managed the state's budget. I'm the only person that's managed people of this scale, both as the chief operating officer in Providence and the state director of administration. And I'm the only person who's ever negotiated a labor contract. So much of what gets done in Providence is done by unionized workers, and the city's unions and the labor contracts that control those labor actions need to be negotiated every 3 years. And it is a significant part of the job. I'm the only person who's ever done that. And so I think that if there's a question about experience, about ability to deliver on promises, there's no other candidate other than me that has that kind of experience. And so I'm excited to try to make that case to the people in Providence. I'm looking forward to the race ahead. As I said, I have a lot of respect for the other people that are currently or thinking about running. We all care about Providence, and we all want a better future for families in Providence. But the question is, who can deliver that better future? And I think I've got something different and a better argument to make in that respect.
And sort of analyzing this primary in terms of support and fundraising, you have some tough hurdles when it comes to your opponents. Councilwoman LaFortune, she represents the east side of Providence, has seen good fundraising numbers all around the city as opposed to just the influential, wealthier east side. And Gonzalo Cuervo has a lot of support from many elected officials, even former mayor of Providence, who was very popular, Mayor Tavares. Are there any, and now that Lieutenant Governor Matos is out of the equation for running for mayor, there are talks that this could make it easier for Gonzalo Cuervo to to end up leading the pack in the primary. Are there any worries that in this crowded field of candidates that could get bigger, even if we include like one or two of the people that we mentioned, like Representative Hull, Rep Diaz, Dylan Conley, et cetera? Are there any worries that in this crowded field of candidates that could get bigger, that it could be tougher than the 2014 bid, for example, because that was also a pack primary?
So, I mean, there'll be a year's worth of political analysis on prognosticating what's going to happen. What I know is this, is that I'm running full-time from now until Election Day. No one's going to outwork me. I am gratified by the support that I have early on from members of the city council, leaders in the Latino community, leaders in the Black community. I have a citywide campaign underway. I've raised more than 3 times as much as the next person, overwhelming majority of which is from Rhode Islanders and residents in Providence. And the chips are going to fall where they're going to fall. I'm really excited about the campaign ahead. I'm really excited about the opportunity to serve, and I'm encouraged with how it's going so far.
And shifting away from the political topics, my final question is one that I ask everyone here on the show, and that question is, in your opinion, what do you think Rhode Island is best known for?
You know, outside of Rhode Island, I think we're known for just a few things. I think people know Newport, the mansions and the history. I think people know Brown and the Rhode Island School of Design. And I think people know our beaches. And so I think we need to lean into those assets. And as it pertains to Providence, you know, just remember that the institutions here, the institutions of higher education, are really what put us on the map. And so forging effective partnerships with them is really important to our identity and our economic vitality.
It certainly is with the Brown University and RISD answer. RISD, you know, Seth MacFarlane, famous alumni from there. Now we have national recognition due to his cartoon Family Guy being in Rhode Island. And in Brown University's case, is a number of famous alumni, including Andrew Yang, who we had mentioned. He might be the America's mayor of New York City. So we do have those good connections. And the Newport beaches are beautiful. I haven't taken a look. I haven't been by the mansions yet, but hopefully this summer, if you know things start to cool down with COVID, I plan to drive by just to see what they look like, because I hear a lot. I've heard that answer a few times as well. Mr. Smiley, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been a pleasure of mine to have you on.
It's been a pleasure for me as well. Thank you.
And thank you once again for watching this episode of Ray-ality TV, or even reading the political profiles article on the Anchor's website at the Rhode Island College School paper. If you want to see future episodes as soon as they're posted on this channel, please click the subscribe button down below, along with the post notification bell icon to the right of it. Or if you want to read future political profiles articles as seen on the Anchor, visit anchorweb.org. I'm Raymond Bakari. I'll see you on the next episode.